You're listening to Cross Rhythms Plymouth, 96.3 FM. And if you're just listening for the very first time, then you'll never have heard life stories before, but that is the program that you are listening to. And it's always my pleasure and privilege to speak with a particular guest about their life, about kind of some of the things, what makes them tick, and particularly their faith, why that is important to them in this day and age, why that came into their lives, and why that's been something that they've held on to. And today I'm speaking with David Cross. He's joining me in the studio. Hi, David.
Hi, David.
It's great to have you here. We've got two Davids in the studio, so right. So that's going to be fun. But David, tell us a bit about, as we always start with these life stories, tell us a bit about your life growing up. Where did you grow up? Your accent doesn't suggest you're from Plymouth, but tell us where you grew up and what that was like for you.
I was born in Doncaster in 1952, and my mother was 16 at the time, and she was sent to a convent for evil women, right. And I was sent to a children's home and brought up in the Roman Catholic children's home.
Right, right.
Which wasn't... I mean, it was my normality, but looking back at it, it wasn't a very good experience, most of it.
Yeah. And what age was that you were separated from your mum?
From the age of about 1.
Okay.
Yes.
So you don't recall any time before then? So your whole time was in that
children's home, yes. And I was fostered 4 times as well and sent back.
Yeah.
Rejected.
What was that experience like? You said it was difficult off air. You said there were some real challenges.
There was.
Do you have any happy memories from those years? What was it like?
The happy memories was with my fellow inmates, for want of a better word. I couldn't think of the right word there.
Sure.
Yeah, with my friends that I made there, that was good.
Yeah.
However, the worst things was the nuns who ran the place. One of them in particular, and Father Murphy, he used to come over every 2 weeks to punish us for being naughty.
Wow. Mm-hmm. I mean, right there to start off your life story, it's fascinating that you've got a cross around your neck, that you're passionate about sharing your faith in Christ. You wouldn't think that growing up in a church sort of children's home and that being a difficult situation for you. So obviously we're going to get to all that. We're going to get to when you found faith, but I just wanted to kind of point to that as an interesting marker in your life. So tell us a little bit about kind of as things progress, teenage years, those kind of things. How did life develop for you?
Well, I was fostered to Harrogate with a couple that lived in Harrogate. I was with them for nearly 4 years, and then I'd failed my 11 plus at school, right? And I came home from from playing. Yeah. And there was a nun sitting there. She said, "We've come to take you back."
Right.
That was it. And they took me back to the children's home. I was quite glad to get back, actually, to get back to my mates, because my experience with them wasn't that good neither.
I was going to ask, what was it like being in foster care? Was that quite a long-term foster placement, that one?
Yeah. I remember the day after that, because they stood us all in a line when Mr. and Mrs. White came to choose a person. And they were told, why don't you take David, because there's nobody coming to see him. And so they took me, and then the next day they said to me, we wanted somebody older. We didn't really want you, because they had a son who was 12 and I was 8, okay? Yeah. And I thought, well, thank you very much for that.
It's not getting off on the right foot.
No, and their son was a bully. Okay, I didn't get on with him at all.
Yeah.
And my experiences within that house wasn't very good.
Yeah. So, I mean, kind of easy for me to say, but a difficult childhood in many ways, a lot of turmoil, a lot of negative situations, and things like that. And then you said you went back to the children's home. Was it the very same one with the same people?
The very same one, yes.
And what was that like going back?
Going back was all right, because I was quite happy to go back, because my friends were there.
Yeah.
And most of them were still there. And and that's when we was going to the senior school, which means we travelled from Boston Spa to Harrogate, which is where the school was. And I enjoyed school to a certain degree, and I wasn't stupid, but I just didn't get really involved in learning lessons too much. Okay?
Yeah.
But at the age of 13, I was called in from playing outside. This is at the children's home now.
Yeah.
And they said, "Your mother's here." I said, the nuns had told me I was an orphan. Right. I had no mother or father.
Right.
So I thought it was this couple that had fostered me.
Sure.
And so I went in, and there was pair of strangers there. And there was my mother, the fellow that she'd married, Arthur, and they had a daughter, a 5-year-old daughter, who was obviously my half-sister.
So your biological mum, and you'd never met her to that point?
Never met her to that point.
Wow.
And it was quite a strange situation. They said, look, hello, David, we've come to take you away.
Gosh.
I said, all right, where to? Well, they lived in Liverpool at the time.
Yeah.
And for me, that was exciting because I was really into music. I've always been into music.
Yeah.
And Liverpool was the centre of the musical universe.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I fell in love with Liverpool Football Club. And Arthur, the guy that she married, used to take me to the football ground every home game.
Yeah.
Anfield. And I fell in love with that. Absolutely loved it. And to this day, I'm still an avid Liverpool supporter.
Yeah.
Arthur was a good man.
Yeah.
But my mother treated him pretty wickedly. She was a naughty woman.
Well, we'll stop for some music there and pick up the story with David right after this. You're listening to Cross Rhythms Plymouth 96.3 FM, and this is Life Stories. And I've got the pleasure and privilege of being joined in the studio by Mr. David Cross. And David, you've been very honest so far, sharing a bit about your life, as we do with Life Stories. Started at the beginning, for you separated from your mum, put into a care home situation from the Catholic Church from the age of about 1. So very little to no connection with your mum. Well, no connection at all until suddenly later in life where you just left it. She kind of came back into your life. I wondered if you'd describe that moment for yourself and in those kind of early days. Did you feel a kind of bond with her? Did you feel any kind of connection? Was it a very strange thing to suddenly be reconnected? What was that like to obviously be reconnected with an estranged mum?
It was very strange. Feeling strange is the right word. I didn't know how I'm supposed to act towards this. They were total strangers to me. And I never felt any kind of love coming towards me from my mother.
Right. And
when she'd been married to Arthur for 5 years, and then she told him about me, right. And he said, come on, let's go and get the little so-and-so out of there.
Wow. Okay.
So it was his
initiative, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so we moved to Liverpool.
Yeah.
And then they decided after 2 years to move back to Doncaster, which for me was not a happy thing at all.
No, sure.
So they moved back to Doncaster and I stayed with them for a few more years, went to school. I left school when I was 15.
Yeah.
And I ended up committing certain offences. I stole a car and I got involved with some really dodgy people.
Sure.
Broke into a telephone box. Got caught for that and ended up going to prison, a detention centre, that's right, for 6 months.
Wow.
And I did quite well in there. I mean, I went in there very unfit. I came out like a super fit criminal. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
You couldn't catch me.
Yeah,
we used to run 5 miles every day, with no problem. Yeah. And we'd stop smoking, obviously, during that period.
Yeah.
So when I came out after that period, I went to see my mother, who was a barmaid in Doncaster. I said, Mum, can I come home?
What sort of age were you at that sort of stage?
That's 16.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
And I said, Mum, can I come home? She said, no, you can't. We don't want you back here ever again. Go away.
Right.
She, like I say, she'd never ever wanted me anywhere near, and there was no love towards her. From what I can gather, she was made to feel very guilty for having me.
Right.
16-year-old girl from a Roman Catholic family.
Yeah.
Getting pregnant at 15.
Yeah.
Having me at 16. I think she was made to feel very, very bad.
So the whole thing was shrouded in sort of shame and from her standpoint.
The whole thing was shame and guilt. It was.
Yeah.
And it was Arthur went to the convent where she was in lockup.
Yeah.
And he was a painter and decorator.
Right.
And he got her out there.
Right.
Okay, and that's how they met.
Wow.
And they got together.
Yeah. So just to go back ever so slightly, what age were you then when she had taken you out for the first instance?
I was 13.
Okay. So your teenage years was this kind of furore of getting used to being back with your mum, all of that kind of stuff. And then in and out of, as you say, kind of criminality and things. This is a
Well,
good
that
place.
started when I went back to Doncaster.
Okay, when you went back to Doncaster, yeah. It's an interesting place and a good place to leave it for this section. We will stop for some music and we'll come back and speak more with David right after this. You're listening to Cross Rhythms Plymouth 96.3 FM. And my name's Dave, here with you for Life Stories. And I'm speaking with David Cross about his life. It's always a great privilege, really, to do these programs. And this one, no different. And David, you've shared a lot about your upbringing, early years. For those of you who are just picking up the story here, you'll be able to check out the website, listen again there. We'll also get this up on YouTube as well, so you'll be able to kind of recap. But kind of in and out of children's homes, back reunited with your mother, into some criminality when you moved to Doncaster, came out from the kind of young offenders institute that you were in at that point, back to your mother, and you said that she at that point said you can't come home. Tell us where.
Not politely neither.
yeah right. Tell us where that left you and kind of what happened next.
Well, I didn't know what to do with myself at all. I was like 16, and I was on my own. I didn't know very many people, and so I looked for somewhere to sleep that night, and it was winter.
Yeah.
And the only place I could find, there was an open garage, no car in it, and there was a carpet on the floor. So I got in that garage, wrapped that around myself, and it was crispy with ice. Okay, and I slept there for the first night.
Wow.
The second night, I found a flat, a block of flats, and I slept in one of the corridors there and got woken up by the milkman in the morning, kicking me awake and calling me names. Yeah.
Right.
Not very nice names neither.
No.
And so I ended up meeting some guys. They were hippies.
Yeah.
Because this is like the 60s, late 60s. And they said to me, come and stay with us. They were squatting a house in Doncaster. And they said, we've got a spare room, you can have it. I said, oh, brilliant, come on then.
Yeah.
And so I moved in with them, and that was my first introduction to drugs.
Sure.
And they were smoking cannabis.
Yeah.
And I'd never smoked it before. And I smoked it in there, and I went really, I think I went green and nearly went sick.
Yeah.
But after the sickness went away, I quite liked the feeling.
Yeah.
And I found out in myself, I thought I found what I was looking for.
Yeah.
You know?
I was going to ask at that stage, really, I suppose, David, we've touched on the details of what happened to you in your life, lots of difficulties, challenges growing up in care homes, kind of abusive situations there, not easy situations in foster care as well. Where did it leave you in a kind of mental and emotional state? And was that part of the reason you got into the criminality in the first stage as well, and kind of that kind of thing?
Well, it pushed me, I would say, towards a certain type of person.
Sure.
Yes.
Sure.
Some of the people that were having bad times at home, and obviously they were, quite a lot of them were of the criminal type. Yeah. And so I met a certain guy, and we used to do bad things. I burgled people's houses and stole cars, all to get money for drugs, really, at the end of the day.
Yeah.
That's what it was. Once I discovered drugs, I realised that I thought I'd found what I was looking for.
Yeah.
This new normality. It was completely different to my old normality, which is very miserable. This took me up to a different place.
So it changed your feelings, essentially.
It did.
It just made you feel slightly different for however long you could have the drugs. Yeah.
But as you can imagine, one thing leads to another.
Yeah. So you, I presume, end up going down the rabbit hole quite far.
I did.
In terms of drugs. So what ages was this then? So from 16?
From 16 to 18.
Yeah.
Okay. That was Doncaster.
Yeah.
And then I decided to leg it to London.
Right.
I'd never really been there before, and I wanted to see it.
Yeah.
So I hitchhiked to London. I went looking for somewhere to live and found a squatting organisation. This was being run by the IMG.
Right.
And so I ended up squatting in this block of flats in Dover Street, opposite the Ritz, down in Piccadilly. And it was a wonderful place. We was there for about 6 months. Okay.
Yeah.
And it was a great place to be based from. To earn money around Piccadilly.
Yeah, of course. So your opportunities basically for for drugs, for the connections, I guess grew existentially once you got into London in that sense.
They did.
We're going to stop for some music there. We're going to pick up the story with David as he tells it right after this. You're listening to Cross Rhythms Plymouth, 96.3 FM. This is Life Stories. I'm in conversation today with David Cross. And, well, as I say, I could recap. There's quite a lot to recap, so you'll have to find this interview out yourself if you're just joining us. We're into kind of the fourth section of 6 in conversation with David here. And, yeah, basically, long story short, difficult upbringing, into kind of low-level criminality and effectively drugs as being an outlet to a different life, a different way to feel about yourself, moving from the north of England to London, where there's a lot more opportunity for drugs. And this was kind of late teens, 20s, wasn't it? That kind of stage of your life. So I guess we'll have to move forward a little bit in your life, as we said off air, just for time. But where did things progress to?
Well, I ended up in my 30s, okay, in Bristol.
Yeah.
There's a long passage that and why I ended up in Bristol, but
yeah, sure.
Never mind that. But I ended up in Bristol on the day of the riots, the Bristol riots.
Right.
And I'd found a flat, well, it was a bedsit upstairs in this room, right round the corner from the Black and White Cafe where all the trouble was starting from.
Yeah.
And I went upstairs and I lifted up my window and they were taking out Molotov cocktails down below and throwing them at the police, etc. And I thought, this is my introduction to Bristol.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, what's this? But that all settled down.
Yeah.
And I had a relationship with a lady who lasted quite a long time. But that was all related to drugs and what have you, sex and drugs.
Yeah.
And eventually, I became a heroin dealer, a small-time heroin dealer.
Yeah.
Where a guy would give a bag to me, I would sell it, give him money, he would give me more.
Yeah, sure, okay. Sure.
And then one day, somebody broke into my house, into my flat, and he had a big knife in his hand.
Right.
And he said, "Give me all your money and your drugs." No, he was Scottish, of course.
Yeah.
And he was unlucky because we'd just given the money and the bag to the man to get the next lot.
Wow.
His timing was absolutely dreadful.
Yeah.
But there was a girl sort of strung out on the couch.
Yeah.
And he said, "Who's that?" As he did that, me and my friend jumped on him. And I don't want to go into any detail, but we made a mess of him.
Yeah.
And we ended up throwing him down the stairs, and then we got taken to prison.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Just before you go on, David, I just want to pick up on the kind of the passage you had with drugs. So was it kind of just one thing after another and eventually got to heroin, as it is for so many people? And it just, you needed something harder and harder and harder until that's where you ended up?
I always said that I would never, ever take heroin. I would never inject. Never.
Sure.
Okay. But there I was in Bristol. The first time I did it, I think we had one needle. It was in the old rocket, the glass and metal ones.
Yeah.
And it went round about 4 or 5 of us, the same one.
Goodness me.
Okay.
Yeah.
And from that, I did contract hepatitis C.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Which I didn't know I had.
Yeah.
That's all been sorted now, I'm glad to say.
Yeah.
But what happened in Bristol then was it's time for me to get myself sorted. I've had enough of this city. I've been there for 8 years. And
at that point, sorry, were you in prison?
I'd been in prison a few times, yes.
Okay. Yeah.
I had two sentences of 12 months.
Okay.
With a 3-month break in between.
Yeah.
Okay. Then there was lots of remands and things like that. Now I was a silly, stupid thief. Do you know what I mean? I wasn't clever at all.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
It was all instant decisions and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I'm mixing up with the wrong people.
Yeah.
But it's my fault, and I'm not proud of any of that.
No. Sure.
None of that. And I look back at it and the things that I did in the name of drugs. Right. I'm ashamed.
Yeah. And you got, obviously, as you described it, a very dark place your life is in, but for the first reason that you wanted to get into it was, as you say, you thought you'd found the answer to your life. You thought you'd found something that gave you a release from the negative feelings and the trauma of what you grew up with, but obviously it took you to a much darker place. So where did that leave you in terms of thinking about life? Where did you think you could turn to? What happened next?
Well, I didn't know where I could turn to, and there was nothing in my mind said I wanted to turn to, okay, apart from when I was strung out.
Sure.
When I was strung out and I had no drugs and I was feeling really ill, I wanted to do something about it.
Yeah.
But as soon as I got some drugs, I think, what's the matter? I'm fine.
No problem.
Yeah. And so I never did actually anything about it.
Sure.
But having all that stuff that happened to me in Bristol, I decided to leg it.
Yeah.
And I ripped off my dealer.
Yeah.
He gave me the bag and I sold it, took the money, and I legged it down to Cornwall.
Yeah.
A lovely place to be.
Yeah.
I knew a friend down there near St. Just.
Yeah.
He was a hippie and his name was Merlin.
Yeah.
Okay. He had an old tin miner's cottage and he said to me, Dave, anytime you get into any trouble, you come down here.
Yeah.
I'll look after you. So I took him up on that.
So it was the only kind of lifeline you had, effectively, at that stage.
That's right. And so I went down there. First of all, I went to see my psychiatrist, and he gave me a prescription for 2 litres of methadone.
Wow.
Loads of sleeping tablets, because I told him the story. I said, look, I've just got to go. Otherwise, I'm going to kill somebody or somebody's going to kill me. Yeah. I've got to go. So he gave me a prescription for this. I legged it down there to Cornwall. And I soon went through all that stuff that I had. And then I had nothing. Mm-hmm. And then I weaned myself off everything.
Wow.
And then I became an alcoholic.
Right.
Swap one thing for another.
Yeah. Well, look, timing-wise, that's a really good place to leave this section, David. It's really fascinating to hear your story, kind of where you've been, where one thing led to another. And people listening to this could be in any form of that particular journey, could be any place of it. So we're going to come to the place where things for your life really turned around after this section. You're listening to Life Stories here on Cross Rhythms Plymouth, in conversation with David Cross. And this interview will be available on our YouTube channel if you want to watch it at Cross Rhythms Plymouth. Search that on YouTube, or we're at CR Plymouth. It'll also be on the website as well. So if you're just listening now and you want to listen again, go to crossrhythms.co.uk/Plymouth and you can pick up the interview from wherever you want at your leisure. But David, things had taken a pretty dark turn for you, to be fair, and in your own words, from a pretty dark start, really. A difficult start, difficult upbringing. Yeah, well, no, as you said, no excuse in that sense. But not a lot of light in your life in terms of that, not a lot of joy and peace and prosperity, any of those terms you want to use. But you found yourself having to run away from Bristol basically for your life, and ending up in Cornwall. How did things start to turn around for you? What was it that changed things?
Okay. There was a festival on at that time on the moor, upon Bodmin Moor, that's right. And it was called the White Goddess Festival, and it was a rave at that time in the 90s.
Yeah.
And I got with a bunch of others, we went in this bus and we went up there, and I got off the bus, and I think they had a 40,000 watt PA system there right on the top of the moors there.
Wow.
The music was kicking, right? And there was a woman leaning on a car door shouting various drugs for sale, ecstasy, speed, all this kind of stuff. So I bought some ecstasy off her so I could go off dancing.
Yeah.
Anyway, after half an hour, nothing was working, so I went back to her and accused her of ripping me off. She said, "Here, have another one for free." Anyway, another time I did the same, she gave me another one. And then everything hit me all at once and I danced the night away. Anyway, at the end of that, I remember jumping into the back of her car. And I said, "You know what?" She said, "What?" She said, I'd fall in love with the first person who would make me a cup of tea right now. My mouth was like this. My tongue was about this fat. And she said, "I will shoot your door, we're off." And she took me off to her house and I moved in with her. So she was a dealer, I was a user, and it was convenient. I got married to this woman eventually.
Yeah.
But living with her was quite rough. I was a slob. I was an out slob. She'd do all the dealing and making all the money and everything, and I was a slob. So in the end, she kicked me out. And when she kicked me out, I found a little bed sit in Camelford in Cornwall. And at that point in my life, I had a prescription for life from a psychiatrist.
Okay.
So we didn't really need to go and buy any, but the prescription would last 3 days, and then we'd have to wait for the next lot. But in Camelford in Cornwall, I remember it was Christmas Eve, and I didn't know what to do. I had no money, I had no drugs, I had no food. Okay, and there was a pub right opposite where I was living, and I could hear all them all in there having a great time. It was Christmas. I went in there thinking, well, somebody will buy me a drink. Nah, nobody bought me nothing. And I came out of there thinking, I'm going to go and burgle your houses. Terrible, terrible attitude. But I'd found out that on Christmas Day that this church was giving away a free Christmas dinner down at the library in Cornwall, in Camelford.
Yeah.
And so next morning I went down to there. I'd never been to charity in all my life, never had.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is the first time I picked up my pride and went for charity. I was starving.
Yeah.
And I went in there, and it was quite funny. They fed me full Christmas dinner, the whole lot. There's these 2 people giving up their Christmas Day to feed. There must have been about, say, 10 of us. And it was a crazy time. And there was an old tramp there, proper tramp. He would go from town to town, see where he could get jobs and stuff. And he had a harmonica.
Yeah.
And I had a guitar. And so we had a little jam session in there. It was quite good. Anyway, the person that was running that place was a guy called David Dickinson.
Yeah.
And he came to see me one night, and he said, he played bass, I played guitar. I said, go and get your bass, let's have a little bit of a jam. And he did. And it was a Saturday night. He said, look, it's 10 o'clock. He said, I've got to go to church in the morning. You know, I've got a lot of work to do there. He said, look, so this atheist, devout atheist might I add, who hated Christians with all his heart because of the experiences that I'd had.
Sure.
In the children's home, etc., said, look, what's an intelligent man like you doing, believing in all these myths and fairy stories? I said, you're so bright. Look at you. He said, look, never mind all that. Would you come along in the morning and help me with the PA system? I said, yeah, because I'd been a roadie with a few bands, okay, at that time.
Yeah.
And I said, yeah, I'll come and give you a hand. So in that morning, I woke up, had my hit.
Yeah.
I went to this church, which was in a school. By the time I got there, it was all up and running. The music was going, and I'd never, ever, in all the churches I'd ever been to, which weren't that many because I was brought up with it, but this was alive. There was people with their arms in the air. The songs were good. There was a band, and I thought, wow, that's different. And I thought, well, I'll sit down. So I sat right at the back there, Sinners Road. Actually, you don't go straight to the front.
Sure.
I sat right at the back there, and and as I was sitting there, a gentleman called Joe, lovely man, he's not alive now, but he stood up and with the Yorkshire accent started to speak how much in love he was with Jesus. As he said that, something in my heart twanged. And I could feel the presence of something. I didn't know what it was.
Yeah, right.
But all I could feel was, tears began to fall down my face until there was racking great sobs. The words were coming out of my mouth and I can't forget it. I said, I'm so sorry, God. I didn't know you were there.
Wow.
Please forgive me.
Wow.
That's what the devout atheist is saying.
There you go.
Yeah.
David, that's a brilliant place to leave this section. We'll pick it up in the last section to see what carried on, how things progressed for you. Yeah. But that's an incredible place to come to in your life.
It really was. It's changed my life radically.
We'll talk more with David after this. Unbelievably, we're at the final part of Life Stories here with David Cross. And you had a quite remarkable experience in the back of a church where, as a devout atheist, as you said, who not only were you believing there wasn't a God, you were quite anti-faith and anti the Christian faith from bad experience you'd had, but you encountered God in a way you've just described. And anyone who's just picking up the story here, you're going to have to listen back to that bit. That was a good part that David told. What happened next?
Okay, what happened next? I remember I sort of gathered myself together because there was water at my feet. There was so much sobbing came out. It must have been years of pain, years of stuff came out of me. Yeah. And I'm so glad nobody came up to me and started to put an arm around me. I'd probably be more likely to rush out.
Sure.
Because in those days I had bright orange dreadlocks.
Right.
I was very skinny and very smelly. And so there was a lot of shame in me.
Sure.
And however, after that, I went up to see. It was like, I wanted, take me to your leader. I wanted to see what's going on here.
Yeah.
And I went up to the lead pastor and I said, excuse me. He said, what? Yes, what do you want? I said, something amazing just happened to me back there. He said, all right, then we'll see you next week, will we? He since became a very, very dear friend and a father figure to myself and my wife.
Yeah.
Okay, and it was through him and that church that we got a lot of teaching.
Yeah.
A lot of teaching, and we began to learn about all the stuff that what Christianity really is. Okay,
Yeah.
It was a real proper Bible believing, Christ-centered church.
Yeah.
And we used to sit around his table at home, bashing the table, looking at these scriptures and stuff. And I remember my wife jumping. I said, I can't believe this. You ran out and had a joint in the car, and came back again.
Yeah.
And I can remember her saying to Hilda, who is Ken's wife, I can't stop injecting, she says. I've done it all my adult life and I can't do it. She said, oh, don't worry, dear. The Holy Spirit will convict you, my love. She got no idea about drugs, but she knew all about her Saviour and that it began a work and it was going to bring it to completion. Yeah. And he did.
Yeah. So,
and with me too.
Well, that's what I was going to say. It's a good place for us to kind of wrap it up, because obviously you've had an encounter with God. You've kind of decided that you want to follow this God that you've just found. Yeah. But obviously you've got years of drug use, years of trauma, years of challenge. So it's not all that it just suddenly goes in one step. But how did that drug addiction finally come free? And what happened in terms of walking out of some of those things?
Wonderful. Well, David Dickinson, the guy that had the bass and invited me to the church in the first place, he gave me and Tina 2 tickets for Cross Rhythms Festival. Right? This was in 1993.
Yeah.
I'd never been to a Christian festival or anything like that before, but I loved festivals.
Yeah. Love music.
So me and Tina went along. It's quite a good story, really. We had this old banger of a car, and we parked it right down the bottom near the woods. And they wanted us to move the car, but we didn't have a tent. And every time the stewards would come, you've got to move the car, put it into the car park. We said, all right, later. Well, we never moved it. And one of the stewards, his name was Pete Nolan, lovely man. This is what I found out afterwards, right? They gathered together as the stewards. They were going to throw us off site because they'd heard that Tina was selling drugs to somebody. And it was a total lie. She actually given some to somebody, right? And they were going to throw us off, but Pete Nolan stood up and said, no, let's get together. And they prayed for us.
Yeah.
We didn't know about this.
Yeah.
At that festival, then I went to one of these meetings. There was about 2,000 people in a marquee. And this guy was speaking. His name was Bruce Oliver. He was speaking on the full armour of God. I hadn't quite got to that bit in my Bible yet.
Yeah.
But it really spoke to me. And at one point, he shouted at Satan to get out of here. And as he did that, something inside me went, ugh! Right? And I thought, what's that? What's that? I didn't know what that was. Anyway, people were called forward for prayer. If anybody wanted prayer, come forward. So I went forward. And there must have been about 200 at the front. Okay? And people were being prayed for along this line. And he came to me. And he said, what do you want? I didn't expect him to ask me a question.
Yeah, he didn't really
He said,
know
what do you want?
wanted.
He said, what have you come here for? I said, look, okay. I said, all my adult life, I've been a junkie. I've been into all kinds of drugs. The only time I've had any space is when I've been in prison, right, from it.
Yeah.
But now I can really feel God saying to me, because I was injecting, and I could feel the Spirit of God saying to me inside, trust me, you don't need this anymore.
Wow.
It's not thou shalt not. It's you don't need it anymore.
Yeah.
He said, you tell God what you want him to do and I'll pray for you.
Yeah.
So I said, Lord, I'm going to ask you to come and fill a space in me, which is very big. Yeah. If you do not fill that space in, I'll probably go back to my first love. I know you're there. I've bumped into you. I know you're there. Please do it. And I gave up all my drugs. It was in a bum bag with all my water, my syringes and everything else. And I gave them to this guy.
Yeah.
And with that, I stopped.
Yeah.
I went home. Okay. I didn't need any more. I had no withdrawal symptoms.
Gosh.
Okay? And I didn't want it anymore. And the Spirit of God really, really began to lead me in those days. And through the church and through giving up the drugs, I began to see clearly again.
Yeah. Well, that's so amazing, David. We're really, unfortunately, running out of time. With all of these interviews, I feel like we could go into so much more. But what would you say, because you made a statement earlier on that drugs, the way into drugs was you thinking you'd found what you were looking for.
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
What was the difference then when you found God, when you found faith?
When I found God, obviously, I found the true thing that I didn't know I was looking for. Okay? Yeah. Because in that was life. There was a new life being put into me. And the other thing which is so important, there was friendship in this church. They gathered around us. They didn't poo-poo us and thought we were dirty junkies or anything, but we had good teaching and we had good fellowship and we were accepted. From a guy that had been rejected so much in his life, I felt accepted and part of something that was valuable.
That's so
and
good.
My relationship with God grew and grew and grew. And since then, we've been involved in all kinds of ministries. We worked for Cross Rhythms for a little while.
I was going to say, I'd love to have more time to speak with you, David, because there's so much more we could talk about. But from that, your life went into lots of ways that not only did you receive this for yourself, but you gave out and helped other people who'd been in similar journeys. I know you foster care, which is a big part of your journey as well.
We opened a house for ex-prisoners as well, which took them straight from prison.
There's been so much that you've done since. And as I say, I wish we had more time to talk about that. But in summary, that's kind of where your life has gone and a huge turnaround. So a remarkable change in life, a remarkable life story. David, I want to thank you for sharing with us. Thank you for this time. And wish you all the best in your future.
Thanks, Dave.